Yo, dear listeners and viewers, hello and welcome back to the podcast. I don't know where you're based, but here in England, where I am, it's freaking hot today. So if you are in the same situation, I feel for you. Anyway, this podcast is not going to be about how hot it is. I just wanted to whinge a little about it to begin with. What we're going to talk about is this. If you're currently tracking calories, but you're not losing weight, I am going to cover a number of solutions. But first, let me start with the solutions I would advise against. The first one I'm going to mention isn't even really a solution, and it's when people conclude that a calorie deficit doesn't work for them. This is obviously incorrect. If you've been a long-time listener, you would know. And I totally understand why someone would think this, though. Because if you've only ever heard the term calorie deficit, but nobody explained to you that it is the scientific principle underlying fat loss, then you could think of it as just another diet, like keto or carnivore. And if that's your conception of a calorie deficit, just like keto or carnivore may not work for you, then it stands to reason to think that a calorie deficit could not work for you either. Well, that's not accurate. Anyway, the other solution I would advise against is to lower your calories right away. This seems logical. You notice that fat loss isn't happening anymore. What are you going to do? You're going to make a change to your calories because you understand what a calorie deficit is. But lowering calories is actually the last thing that I personally do in this situation. When a client seems to have plateaued, I don't immediately change their calorie targets. In most cases, in my experience, people don't necessarily need fewer calories. They need to tighten up their tracking accuracy. But I also want to make an important distinction. If you underreport a food or you forget to log a meal once in a while, it's really not a big deal. It's when these inaccuracies accumulate every day that you could be eating hundreds more calories than you're actually reporting. And that's when you can easily be eating at maintenance without realizing. So in today's episode, I want to talk you through the 5 most common calorie tracking mistakes that could be holding you back. The first one is that you're logging food in tablespoons or cups. These are units of volume, not units of weight, so it makes them less accurate to measure weight. Tracking in tablespoons is especially dangerous, so to speak, with high calorie spreads like peanut butter or standard butter, or high calorie liquids like oils. For instance, 10 grams of olive oil contains 90 calories, and it's very easy to be off by 10 grams or more if you're tracking your olive oil as 1 tablespoon and then just splashing a little bit of it onto the pan. So that's why I would always recommend weighing everything in grams or ounces or milliliters, which are all units of weight. The second most common mistake that I see is assuming that the weight on the package is accurate. For example, instead of weighing your 180 grams pack of chicken breast, you're trusting that the weight displayed on the box is correct and you're just logging it as 180 or divided by however many portions you're having if you're dividing it into portions. Anyway, you get the gist. You get what I'm saying here. The thing is, manufacturers are allowed a margin of error when it comes to weighing food. And I've been personally weighing my food at home for 8 years. I don't weigh food when I go out to restaurants. And it is surprisingly common for the actual weight of an item to differ from what's printed on the package. The difference usually isn't enormous, but it's significant enough that if you eat a lot of packaged food and ready meals, it's going to matter. I'm going to give you a specific example here. So I have a client who I'm going to call Client C, and they know who I'm talking about if they're listening, and they work multiple shifts every week at a mental health facility. So they often have to rely on high protein ready meals to hit their calories and macros because they simply do not have the energy or the time to cook. However, at some points, a few months ago, they hit a fat loss plateau despite on paper doing everything that I was asking them to do. And the first thing I did was ask them to run what I call a tracking audit and consider how accurately they were weighing all of their food. And when they ran that audit and they started bringing a food scale to work to weigh their packaged food, they went from a plateau to losing 1 to 2 pounds every single week reliably without me touching their calorie target at all. So that's how important it can be for somebody who eats a lot of food out of the packaging. It's the same for me as well. I don't particularly like cooking. A lot of the food I make is pre-cooked, or it's bagged, it's canned, it's in a box. So I have to weigh it because the margin of error, if I don't, is really high for me. The third mistake is assuming that the weight per portion is accurate. And the weight per portion is particularly important for American clients because often with American foods, you have the calories and macros per individual portion, as opposed to the calories and macros per 100 grams, which are more common in Europe. In Europe and in England in particular, we usually get both. We get the calories and macros per 100 grams and per a portion that the manufacturer decides upon. In America, I've noticed it's more often than not only the calories per portion that are indicated. And sometimes, more frequently than not, actually, as far as I have seen, there is also an indication of the weight of the portion in grams, which is super helpful. And so when you have that indication, you don't want to trust that every single item in that package weighs exactly that much. For example, if you have a box of bagels and it says that each bagel weighs 83 grams, you're going to want to weigh each individual bagel individually if you can, because there is going to be a margin of error and it can be significant. Having said that, once again, it comes down to how important the margin of error is in your particular situation. If you eat a bagel every once in a while and you're running out the door and you just need to grab this bagel and eat it, well, it's fine if you don't weigh it. But if you eat bagels every single day and also you eat a lot of other packaged food that comes in portions in a package, and these are all relatively high calorie foods, like bagel is a pretty calorie dense piece of bread for what it is, then you may want to weigh these items. And if you can't every now and again, that's fine, but you would want to weigh the majority of it. So always consider my suggestions through the lens of what's actually going to move the needle for you and what's actually realistic in your situation. And if you can apply all of my suggestions, so much the better. But if you are in a position where you cannot, then you want to focus on the low-hanging fruit. Anyway, the fourth mistake is trusting that the calories on the menu are accurate when you're eating out. Now, having calories displayed on a menu is incredibly useful. However, they are always going to be less accurate than the calories for a meal that you prepared yourself, because you weigh every ingredient one at a time in the comfort of your own home, whereas a chef in a busy kitchen is going to eyeball every single item while trying to survive the pressure of their job. This is why I generally recommend adding around 20% to the caloric content of restaurant food, whether the menu states the calories or whether you have to estimate them yourself, and 10% to your estimate of a meal that was made by someone else. For instance, if you eat at McDonald's, you want to add 20% to the total calories of that meal. So if the meal totals 500 calories, 20% of 500 off the top of my head is 100, so you would log 600 calories total. On the other hand, if you're eating your mom's curry and she didn't track all of the ingredients for you, then you want to get a new mother. Obviously, this is a joke. You want to add 10% to the estimate of that curry. The final mistake that I want to talk about is tracking the cooked nutritional values for pasta and rice when you're weighing these foods before cooking. This makes a bigger difference than you think. First off, this is most relevant in the UK, where it's very common for labels, especially for UK produced pasta, to report the nutritional values for pasta and rice after cooking. Whereas, as far as I've seen, in Italy, for example, and in America as well, these nutritional values are listed per unit of food, usually per 100 grams or per portion, before cooking. Here's what you need to understand. Pasta and rice increase in weight as they absorb water during the cooking process. As a result, 100 grams of raw pasta contains roughly double the calories of 100 grams of cooked pasta. So if you weigh your pasta before cooking, but you log the cooked nutritional values, you pick an entry that says cooked pasta on your calorie tracking app, you could be underreporting your intake by hundreds of calories. You could be eating twice the amount of the calories that you're logging because cooked pasta, the same weight portion of cooked pasta is going to have fewer calories, about half the calories of the same weight portion of raw pasta. Said in different words, 100 grams of raw pasta is going to have 350 calories. 100 grams of cooked pasta is going to have about 175. That is a massive difference. So what you want to do is keep the tracking consistent with when you weigh the food. If you weigh the food before cooking, then use an entry that says raw for any food, but pasta and rice are the ones that make the biggest difference, as well as other grains like couscous and noodles as well. Now, on the other hand, if you're eating, or rather, if you're tracking the food using an entry that says raw, I don't know. I lost track of what I was gonna say. Let me start again. So if you're weighing your pasta cooked, use an entry that says cooked pasta. Vice versa, if you're weighing your pasta raw, which is what I would recommend most of the time if you can, then you want to use an entry that uses the raw values for that pasta. I usually recommend weighing food raw most of the time because, unless stated otherwise, most nutritional labels are going to report the values per for the raw item. So it's always going to be inherently more accurate if you track a food raw and you weigh it raw as well. Again, if every once in a while you can't do that and you have to do it after cooking, it's not the end of the world. So these are the 5 most common mistakes. Now, before wrapping up this podcast, I also want to cover 2 important caveats. The first caveat is that tracking more accurately will only bust your plateau if your calorie target is effective to begin with. Tightening up your tracking is not going to fix a calorie target that's too high to start with. And if you want to learn how to calculate your calories, I have a short 10-minute YouTube video about this exact topic on my YouTube channel. It's titled Stop Guessing Your Maintenance Calories. So you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel and search for it using the search bar, and you find a link to my YouTube channel in the show notes to this episode. Or you can just click on my handle if you're watching from YouTube. And if you would like me to calculate your calorie needs for you, feel free to email me or DM me on Instagram, and I am absolutely going to do it for you for free. I do so much more as a coach than setting calorie and macro targets, so I don't mind doing this without being charged for it, because you could also just do it with a calculator. But I'm probably going to be a little bit better than that if I can be so humble, or so not humble, really. I'm not a very humble person, am I? You, dear listeners and viewers, should know it by now. Anyway, enough about me. Second caveat is that you do not need to be the most anal tracking machine 365 24/7, because it's going to drive you insane and because it is not necessary to see results. For example, if you're out and about and you brought a banana, don't worry about carrying a food scale in order to weigh your banana. Just track it as one goddamn banana. But if you're at home, you really have no excuse not to track it properly. Finally, if you want a comprehensive guide on how to track calories consistently and accurately enough to see results, listen to episode 167 of this podcast, which is I call it my masterclass in calorie and macro tracking. I covered everything from how to track accurately to how to use ChatGPT to estimate, or any AI, to estimate the calorie content in meals that you're eating out. It is very comprehensive. It's what I send all my new clients to teach them how I expect that they will track their food. Check it out. And that is a wrap for today's podcast. If you want to work with me, you can apply for one-on-one coaching via the link in my bio. Thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you next time.